Hey, Joe. Obviously, your first full summer planning for everything here, and then pretty big trade for you yesterday. Your thoughts on Jrue and just how, if anything, changes for you heading into the season there from a planning perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think things will change a little bit from the beginning. Obviously going into the offseason and most of the preseason having a general idea of what the roster is, and then, changing it a little bit. But I think it's changed for good. I think both were good. I think the roster before and the roster now is good. And so just more focusing on each guy's strengths. And obviously Jrue has high character, plays with a great mindset, and has the reputation, of being a tough defender and somebody that can really change the game on both ends of the floor. So just looking to plug that into, kind of the roster that we have.
Joe, I know it just happened and you've got to go through camp and see, but have you given any thought initially to how you might start the games? Would you go with Jrue and Derek in the backcourt, or would you go, double big?
Yeah, I mean, we put thought into that. I think with the roster that we have and the season, I thought something that was good for us last year was our ability to go back and forth of double big and playing small. And so put thought into it. Haven't really come across kind of what the best way to go about that is yet. But I want to be as open-minded as we can, knowing we have a lot of flexibility, in the backcourt and in the front court.
Joe, after spending the whole offseason just learning from last year, evaluating, I guess, what are some of the lessons and things you've grown over this summer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton, right? And I think we'll be able to talk more about those, as the season goes on, saying like, hey, this is what I thought about that last year, and this is kind of how we're approaching it this year. But there's been so many. Initially, I would say, the differentiating between the beginning of the season, middle of the season. So how you kind of navigate different points of the season. And I think there's always going to be ups and downs. I think each part of the season has a theme to it. And just going back and say, okay, here's why we were this the first 20 games of the year. Here's why we were this at the middle of the season. What were we like post All-Star break? What were we like the last 20 games of the season? What were we like heading into the postseason? How do we handle each round of the postseason? And so just really trying to develop a mindset and a perspective throughout each journey of our season, knowing that we have to, get better every single day and just kind of handle when things go your way and when they don't go your way. So just really excited to have the data available from last year, and then being able to pull and apply that when necessary. And then at the same time, being able to just reinvent and express myself as a coach, and then allow a space for our team to express who they are, and then create a shared identity, create shared ownership, and a shared vision for where we want to be towards the end of the year.
Joe in the middle, 3 rows back. Obviously, as Brad said, anytime you can add a player like Jrue Holiday, you go and do it. What was your reaction when the news broke that you guys landed Jrue, especially with the team that was built up in Milwaukee that for sure you guys will likely see in the playoffs? Just
grateful and open-minded. And, anytime you can add character and mindset, I think it's a win. And so we have that in our building. We've had that in our building, and then we've now added that into our building. And so, this isn't about like he has to come here and be anything other than who he is and make us better on both ends of the floor, and then also complement everybody else. And that's kind of the theme of the season for us, is like, do we have the ability to bring the best out of each other, to play team basketball, and at the same time understand that we're all going to have to sacrifice, we're all going to have to give up small bits and pieces of ourselves to get to where we want to get to, and each person's role is going to look different at the beginning of the season, at the end of the season, at the beginning of the game, at the end of the game, and it's not getting caught up in anything other than that. Is like, how do we impact winning? How does what we do have an effect on the guy next to us? And, can we create that shared ownership for a long period of time? Can we be the more physical, the more connected, the more unselfish? Every media day, every team starts out saying the same thing. Every coach is saying the same thing. Everybody's excited. Everyone feels like they got a chance, blah, blah, blah. And can you maintain that through the ebbs and flows and the variables that you come across during an NBA season?
Joe, with your new assistant coaches, have you kind of divvied out, is somebody going to be handling more offense? Is somebody going to be handling more defense? For lack of a better term, like a defensive coordinator. What are the responsibilities going to be for your assistants?
Yeah, that was a really good, first of all, credit and thanks to the staff from last year. I thought under the circumstances they did the absolute noble, loyal, best job they could at making it a great environment, for us to try to achieve a goal. And I'm happy that they, got the promotions or the situations or the roles that they wanted. One of the most fun things for me was going through the process of developing a staff and, surrounding myself around, people that can complement the players, can complement, who I am as a coach, and can also work together. And so we kind of took this approach of like tribal leadership of, communicating and working in teams of 3s and 4s instead of one-on-one. And what you can see in a lot of staff sometimes is, a head coach might build a relationship with one coach because of the way he thinks, and it could be a like-minded thought. And then you sometimes neglect someone else who's working by themselves, or you'll have 2 or 3 people working together and they're coming up with an idea, but then if it doesn't go their way, then they're kind of affected by it. And so we really wanted to how could we build a shared vision? How could we build communication? How could we build ownership? And so we have like an offensive team, and then within that offensive team, each person has an individual role, and then we have a defensive team, and within that team, each person has an individual role, and the communication that they go through together is super important. And so that by the time we get to a full team meeting, we've already had a group of people argue, go over, talk about their philosophy, do what they want to do, and then it's my job to tell them no. But it's my job to listen to them. And so I think just creating that environment of that tribal leadership, that togetherness, that ownership, it's something that I'm really excited to do, and our staff has done a great job like this offseason. We came into the offseason wanting to build an environment of work ethic, an environment of teaching and developing. And I thought our staff really, our staff and our players really springboarded that environment.
Joe, how do you deal with the expectations, the championship expectations, and at the same time make the leap from year 1 to year 2? And was there something you picked up or did this summer to kind of relieve some of the pressure, or to change things now that you're the permanent head coach, you're not going in, you have that security? Was there something you did differently?
Well, not necessarily different, but to answer your first question about how you handle expectations, no one's going to have higher expectations than I have for myself and then that we have as a player. And we know the end goal is to win a championship. That's why everybody does what they do. That's why we spend the entire season away from our families. That's why we have positive emotions, negative emotions. At the end of the day, it's we're all trying to achieve something that's really, really hard. And so the expectations are the expectations. I always say I'd rather be in a city like this that has high expectations instead of going somewhere where there are no expectations. So I coached at a level where when you lost the game, it wasn't on the bottom line and nobody cared. And that was fun, but at the end of the day, you didn't get that connection. And so to me, the expectations should be there. And the second piece of I didn't do anything different as much as for me, I try to grow just as much of the person as I do as a coach. And I think for coaches and players, who you are comes out on the court, and just putting yourself in a constant environment of growth, of learning, pushing yourself to the highest of mental, physical, or emotional limits can try and simulate what it's like trying to go through an NBA season. And going through an NBA season is really difficult. It's really hard, but it's fun. And so can you simulate that in the off season?
Joe, you've used the term mindset a couple of times now. Can you kind of sum up what mindset you want your team to have?
Number one, we just have to be the toughest, most physical, most open-minded team. To me, mindset is all about how you interpret something that's happening and then how you respond to it. And each and every situation gives you an opportunity to act a certain way. And so we have to have a collective approach of toughness, of having that mindset and having the togetherness. All the things that every company in the world is trying to adhere to on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, it's what's our daily approach? And it doesn't have to be nice all the time. We don't have to be friends. I want us to be, extremely, extremely competitive, extremely, extremely tough on both ends of the floor, and extremely, extremely connected.
Marcus had been a guy who's been willing to take on leadership vocally and so forth. who do you hope kind of fills that role? Who do you kind of envision it? And is Holiday part of that?
Everyone's a part of it. It has to come from everybody. It's not, everyone has to communicate. It's not just on one person to communicate and everybody else not to. And I think sometimes when you get into like coaches talking about we need to communicate better, there's two pieces to that. There's like the communication piece, and then there's the reciprocal piece of like responding to the communication. And there has to be both of those things. And it's not just one person's job. So Drew's a part of it, but so is Jason, so is Jalen, so is Al. Everybody, we have to be able to communicate verbally, non-verbally, body language. All of our emotions, we have to communicate those for us to grow as a team.
Joe, other players have talked about rebuilding that defensive identity this year. Jalen, Jason want to make all defense. You guys even played a little bit of zone in the summer league, it looked like. How do you kind of see yourself forming that defensive identity, and could you go to some of those zone looks this year?
The defensive identity just starts with the mindset. There was a lot of times last year where we were a great defensive team, and then there were times where we didn't make that our foundation. And so at the end of the day, you just have the proper mindset. Like, defense is what gets you in the door. Defense is the admission ticket. But it's toughness, it's mindset, it's the ability to just be physical on both ends of the floor. So you just have to do it. You don't really have a choice. And that's something I can get better as a coach. I think I was talking about this the other day. Like, when something's so obvious to me, I have a tendency to not emphasize it as much. And it's like, maybe it's because I sucked at offense, so I had to play defense. Nobody had to remind me to play defense because I couldn't do anything else. And it's like, if you want to be great, you have to play defense, and you have to be just a mother on that end of the floor. But there are times where I don't always say that because it's obvious. But I think that's the thing that I learned this year is it's not that obvious. And so, you just have to talk about it all the time. And defense and toughness gets you in the door.